Okay, and now I'll show one more Rook endgame where I made a fairly big blunder and lost the game because of that blunder. It's black's turn in this position, and I was playing with the black pieces. I'm down a pawn. I have only one pawn on the h-file against two of white's pawns, but because it's a Rook endgame and there's very few pawns on the board, I have good chances to make a draw. In fact, this is a theoretically drawn position. So here I had a choice between two plans, basically. One plan is to support the rook pawn from the side with the rook. So say I could advance the pawn to h2 and have it guarded by the rook from the second rank. And then the idea of this plan is to keep the white rook distracted. I would always be threatening, say the white rook is going to be on h5. I would always be threatening with the promotion of the pawn and distracting the white rook with that. The other plan is to place the rook ahead of the pawn. So I could play something like rook f1, rook h1, and then advance the pawn all the way to h2, and then I would always have the threat of a check to the white king, and then promoting the pawn. So this would also force the white rook to be guarding my pawn from behind, and also the white king would have to be very careful about the checks. So I had to think about theoretical positions and decide which plan here is correct. So I went with rook f1 and the plan of transferring the rook to h1, and we'll see why this was a mistake. So I went rook f1. As expected, white put the rook behind my pawn. Again, I'm following my plan. a4, h3, king b3. And now it turns out that there's a big problem here. Only here I realized that there's a big problem with what I had decided earlier. It turns out that white is going to keep the pawn on the second rank, and this is a very important detail. Basically, now if I go something like h2, the white just keeps the pawn on the second rank, the b pawn on the second rank, and advances the a pawn. And I cannot play a check against the king, and I also cannot trade pawns by playing something like rook to b1, because then the white rook would capture the pawn on h2 and at the same time defend the pawn on b2. And because of this, there's nothing I can do against his main plan. So the game ended pretty quickly. Like, my main defensive idea doesn't work, so I have to. So here, instead of playing h2, I instead try to force white to advance the pawn to the third rank. And now I can try to go back to the same plan. Now, if his king is ever abandoning the, say, like if his king goes somewhere to a5, and my pawn on h2, then I could still try to follow the same plan and attack the b pawn with tempo, with the threat of promoting the pawn to h1. But it doesn't work because I lost too much time going king h2, rook h2, rook h1. So now white wins quite easily. And now the pawn is already on b4, and it's too late to follow up with my plan. And the game ended here. I resigned because white is supporting the pawn with the king, and he's threatening to just take on h2, and at the same time, if I promote on h1, he's just going to take on h1. queen, wins. So this position is completely lost, and I resigned here. Going back, so what if in this position I realize that the pawn is already on the second rank, I can't use this plan of having the rook on h1, and what if I just decided to keep my rook active and keep it on the second rank? So it turns out that I had a draw this way. So I'm not yet on the second rank, but I will be able to do this because at some point white will have to expose his king against the check. So he goes a4, king c6, b3. It's hard for white to make progress without pushing the b pawn. So he has to play something like b3, f2, and now h2. And this position is a theoretical position which I had studied shortly before the tournament, but I forgot about this. And this position is a draw, although not a trivial one. So we'll see the idea of black's defense. So white still advances the pawns. But it turns out in this position white can't really make significant progress with advancing his pawns. So say king b5, I just give checks. So this is the advantage of having the rook active. It can now give checks along the 4th and 5th ranks. So rook g5, a4, I go back to protect the pawn. Say he advances the pawn. And now white has to decide how to advance. And basically, if at any point he tries to advance the pawns with moves like a6, then I have a very neat idea of rook g6, and this is the basis for black's defense. This attacks both the pawn and the rook, and basically after a move like this, it's going to be a draw because I exchanged too many pawns. And my king is in front of the white pawn, so there's not enough here for white to win. And if white can't advance his pawns, he basically is stuck. So this position is a draw. A fairly complicated choice I had to make, but I still think I should have made the right decision, especially that I knew about the idea of having I knew about the idea that in this position, if the pawn is on h2 and this pawn is on the second rank, that when the rook captures on h2, it will guard the b pawn. I knew about this idea, so I should have realized that this plan of having the rook on h1 is completely losing, and I should have just gone for the other plan of keeping the rook on the side. But again, endgame is when people are most tired and when they have less time than during other parts of the game, and that's when most mistakes are being made.